My name is Derek, and I used to work the night shift at a gas station off Route 17 inches rural Pennsylvania. This happened back in 2019, and I still think about it almost every single day. The gas station was one of those old ones, the kind that looks like it hasn't been renovated since the 1980s. Flickering fluorescent lights, a broken coffee machine that nobody ever fixed, and a bathroom that I refused to clean after midnight. My shift ran from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., and most nights were dead quiet. Maybe 3 or 4 customers the entire night. Truckers mostly, sometimes a lost traveler. It was a Thursday night in October when things got weird. Around 2 a.m., this old sedan pulled up to pump number 3. The car looked ancient, covered in dust and mud, like it had been driving through back roads for hours. A man stepped out. He was tall, maybe 6'2", wearing a long coat that seemed way too heavy for the weather. His face was pale, almost gray under the station lights. He didn't pump any gas. He just stood there, staring at the convenience store window, staring at me. I figured he was confused or maybe having car trouble, so I pressed the intercom button and asked if he needed help. He didn't respond, didn't move, just kept staring with these hollow eyes that seemed to look right through me. After about 5 minutes of this, I started getting uncomfortable. I reached for my phone to maybe call my manager or even the cops, but when I looked back up, the man was gone. His car was still there, engine running, but he had vanished. I watched the security monitors, switching between cameras, trying to find where he went. Nothing. It was like he had dissolved into thin air. Then I heard it. A knock on the back door, the employee entrance that led to the storage room. Nobody ever used that door. It was always locked from the inside, and the only people who had keys were me and my manager. The knocking continued, slow and rhythmic. Knock, knock, knock. I grabbed the baseball bat we kept behind the counter and slowly made my way to the back. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The knocking stopped just as I reached the storage room door. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, bat raised, ready for whatever was on the other side. Then I heard breathing. Heavy, ragged breathing coming from the other side of the door. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaking. "The store is closed. You need to leave." The breathing stopped. Then a voice, deep and distorted, like someone talking through a broken radio. "Salt. I know you're alone, Derek." I froze. How did he know my name? I wasn't wearing a name tag. I never wore my name tag during night shifts. I backed away from the door slowly, keeping my eyes fixed on it. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. As the operator answered, the back door handle started rattling violently, like someone was trying to rip it off. 911, what's your emergency? There's someone trying to break into the gas station on Route 17. Please send someone now. The rattling stopped immediately. Complete silence. I stayed on the line with the operator for 15 minutes until a patrol car arrived. The officers searched the entire perimeter, checked the back door, examined the old sedan still sitting at pump 3. Here's the thing that still haunts me. The officers ran the plates on that sedan. It came back registered to a man named Harold Vickers. Harold Vickers had been reported missing 3 weeks earlier. His body was found 2 days after my incident, in the woods about 10 miles from the gas station. He had been dead for at least a month. The coroner's report said he died from exposure, but the car at my station that night was warm, the engine was running, someone had been driving it. I quit that job the next week. I don't drive on Route 17 anymore. And sometimes, late at night, I still hear that Volce in my head. I know you're alone, Derek. This story was told to me by my cousin Marcus, and I have no reason to believe he made any of it up. Marcus is one of the most level-headed people I know, a software engineer who doesn't believe in ghosts, aliens, or anything supernatural. But what happened to him at Blackwood Lake changed him forever. In the summer of 2021, Marcus and 3 of his college buddies decided to rent a cabin in northern Ontario for a week-long fishing trip. The cabin was remote, about a 2-hour drive from the nearest town, accessible only by a dirt road that wound through dense forest. No cell service, no internet, no neighbors for miles. Just them, the lake, and the wilderness. The first 2 days were perfect. They caught fish, drank beer, played cards, and enjoyed being disconnected from the world. It was exactly the escape they needed. On the 3rd night, things started to feel off. Marcus woke up around 3 a.m. to the sound of footsteps on the cabin's wooden porch. Slow, deliberate footsteps, like someone was pacing back and forth. He figured it was one of his friends going out for a smoke, so he tried to go back to sleep. But then he realized something. All three of his friends were in the cabin with him. He could hear Jake snoring in the bunk across the room. Tyler and Sam were in the other bedroom. So who was on the porch? Marcus lay there, paralyzed, listening to those footsteps. Back and forth, back and forth. They continued for almost an hour before finally stopping. The next morning, he mentioned it to his friends. They laughed it off, said it was probably a deer or a raccoon. Marcus wanted to believe them, but he knew what he heard. Those were human footsteps. That night, Marcus decided to stay awake. He sat by the window with a flashlight, watching the porch. Around 2 a.m., the footsteps started again. He turned on the flashlight and pointed it at the porch. Nothing. The porch was empty, but the footsteps continued, clear as day, right in front of him. He woke up his friends this time. They all heard it now. 4 grown men standing in the living room, listening to invisible footsteps on the porch. Jake grabbed a hunting knife and threw open the front door. The footsteps stopped. The porch was empty. The forest around them was dead silent. No crickets, no owls, no wind, just absolute silence. Then they saw it. Across the lake, on the opposite shore, there was a figure standing at the water's edge. It was too far to make out details, but it was definitely human-shaped, and it was watching them. Tyler grabbed his binoculars and looked. He went pale immediately. He handed the binoculars to Marcus without saying a word. Marcus looked. The figure was a woman, or at least it had the shape of a woman. She was wearing a white dress that seemed to glow in the moonlight, but her face was wrong. Where her eyes should have been, there were just dark, empty sockets. And she was smiling, a wide, unnatural smile that stretched too far across her face. As Marcus watched, the figure roused one arm and pointed directly at him. They packed up and left that night. They drove for 2 hours in complete silence, not stopping until they reached the nearest town. None of them ever went back to Blackwood Lake. Marcus later did some research on the area. He found an old newspaper article from 1987 about a woman named Eleanor Vance who had drowned in Blackwood Lake. Her body was never recovered. Locals said she had been heartbroken after her fiancé left her and had walked into the lake one night, never to be seen again. The article included a photo of Eleanor. Marcus recognized her immediately. It was the same face he had seen through those binoculars, except in the photo, she had eyes. He printed that article and burned it. He never wanted to see her face again. My name is Sarah, and I live in a suburb outside of Chicago. What I'm about to tell you happened last winter, and I'm still not sure what to make of it. I work as a nurse at a hospital downtown, which means I often get off work late at night. Usually, I take the train home, then walk about 15 minutes from the station to my apartment. I've done this walk hundreds of times. It's a safe neighborhood, well-lit streets, quiet but not deserted. One night in December, I got off the train around midnight after a particularly exhausting shift. It was cold, maybe 20 degrees, and there was a thin layer of snow on the ground. I started my usual walk home, headphones in, music playing, lost in my own thoughts. I was about halfway home when I got this feeling. You know that feeling when someone is watching you, like a prickling sensation on the back of your neck? I turned around and saw a man about 50 feet behind me. He was wearing a dark jacket and jeans, nothing unusual. His face was obscured by a hood. He wasn't doing anything threatening, just walking in the same direction as me. I told myself I was being paranoid. This was a public street. People walk on public streets. I kept walking, but I picked up my pace slightly. A minute later, I looked back again. The man was still there, same distance behind me, maybe a little closer. I turned down a side street, one that wasn't on my usual route. If he was just a random person walking home, he would keep going straight. I waited at the corner, pretending to check my phone, and watched. He turned down the same street. My heart started racing. I walked faster now, no longer trying to hide my fear. I turned down another street, then another. Each time, he followed. Never running, never calling out, just following at that same steady pace. I was 2 blocks from my apartment when I decided I couldn't lead him to where I lived. I changed direction and headed toward a 24-hour convenience store I knew was nearby. If I could get inside, I would be safe. I could call the police, call someone, anyone. I started running. Behind me, I heard his footsteps speed up. He was running too. I burst through the convenience store door, gasping for breath. The cashier looked up at me, startled. I ran to the counter and told him someone was following me, that I needed to call the police. The cashier looked past me, toward the door. "What are you talking about?" he said. "There's nobody out there." I turned around. The street was empty. The man was gone. The cashier let me stay until the police arrived. They searched the area, but found nothing. No footprints, in the snow except mine. No witnesses, nothing. I thought it was over. I thought maybe I had imagined it, stressed and exhausted from work. I took a cab home that night and tried to forget about it. 3 days later, I came home from work to find an envelope slipped under my apartment door. Inside was a single photograph. It was a picture of me, taken through my living room window, sitting on my couch watching TV. I moved out of that apartment the next week. I stayed with my sister for a month before finding a new place across town. I changed my route to work, changed my phone number, changed everything I could think of. It's been over a year now, and I haven't seen the man again. But sometimes, late at night, I still get that feeling, that prickling sensation on the back of my neck, like someone is watching me. I try not to look. My name is Marcus, and this happened when I was living in a rundown apartment complex in Cleveland, Ohio. I was 23, broke, and desperate for cheap rent. The building was old, built sometime in the 1960s, and most of the units had been vacant for years. When I moved in, the landlord told me there were only 2 other tenants in the entire building. I never saw either of them. For the first 3 months, I lived in complete silence. No footsteps in the hallways, no voices through the thin walls, no signs of life whatsoever. It was like I was the only person in that entire forgotten structure. The hallways were always empty, the stairwells always quiet. I could hear my own dryer rumbling through 3 floors of the building whenever I did laundry. That's how dead silent it was. I didn't mind at first. I worked late shifts at a warehouse across town and came home exhausted. The silence was peaceful. But then things started to change. One night in November, I came home around midnight. As I walked up the stairs to my 3rd floor apartment, I heard something that made me freeze. Footsteps. Coming from the floor above me. Slow, deliberate footsteps, pacing back and forth. I stood there listening for a good 5 minutes. The footsteps continued, never stopping, never changing rhythm, just back and forth, back and forth. I told myself it was probably one of the other tenants I'd never met. Maybe they were insomniacs like me. I went to my apartment and tried to forget about it, but the footsteps became a nightly occurrence. Every single night, around midnight, I would hear them, always from the 4th floor. Always that same slow, rhythmic pacing. I started to get curious. Who was up there? Why did they only walk at night? One evening, I decided to investigate. I climbed the stairs to the 4th floor, something I had never done before. The hallway was dark, only one flickering light at the far end still working. There were 6 apartment doors, all of them closed. I walked slowly, listening for the footsteps. Nothing. Complete silence. I knocked on the 1st door. No answer. I tried the handle. It was unlocked. I pushed it open and found an empty apartment. No furniture, no belongings, thick dust covering everything. It looked like nobody had lived there in years. I checked the next apartment. Same thing. Empty. Abandoned. Dust everywhere. I checked all 6 apartments on that floor. Every single one was vacant. There was nobody living on the 4th floor. There hadn't been anyone living there for a very long time. That night, I lay in bed, wide awake, listening. At exactly midnight, the footsteps started again, right above my head. Back and forth. Back and forth. I couldn't explain it. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was pipes. Maybe it was the building settling. Maybe it was rats. But deep down, I knew what footsteps sounded like. And those were footsteps. A week later, I was coming home late again when I saw something that stopped me cold. There was a girl standing at the end of my hallway. She was maybe 19 or 20, wearing a white nightgown, her dark hair hanging over her face. She was just standing there, facing the wall, completely motionless. I called out to her. "Hello? Are you okay?" She didn't respond, didn't move, didn't acknowledge me at all. I took a few steps toward her, and she suddenly turned. But she didn't turn normally. Her body stayed facing the wall while her head rotated toward me at an unnatural angle. I couldn't see her face clearly in the dim light, but I saw her eyes. They were wide open, unblinking, and they seemed to glow faintly in the darkness. I ran. I ran to my apartment, slammed the door, and locked it. I pushed my dresser against the door and sat on my bed, heart pounding, hands shaking. Then I heard it, knocking. Soft at first, then louder. Someone was knocking on my door. I didn't answer. I didn't move. I just sat there, barely breathing. I ran. I ran to my apartment, slammed the door, and locked it. I pushed my dresser against the door and sat on my bed, heart pounding, hands shaking. Then I heard it, knocking. Soft at first, then louder. Someone was knocking on my door. I didn't answer. I didn't move. I just sat there, barely breathing. The knocking stopped, and then I heard something worse, whispering, multiple voices, whispering just outside my door. I couldn't make out the words, but there was more than one person out there, more than one voice. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. I told them someone was trying to break into my apartment. They said they'd send someone. While I waited, I heard the voices moving away. Footsteps going down the hallway, then down the stairs. Then silence. The police arrived 20 minutes later. They searched the entire building, every floor, every apartment, every stairwell. They found nothing. No girl in a white nightgown, no intruders, no explanation for what I had seen and heard. But here's what really terrified me. One of the officers came back and asked me a strange question. He asked if I knew about the building's history. I said I didn't. He told me that 15 years ago, a young woman had died in that building. She had been living alone on the 4th floor when she fell down the stairs one night. Some people said she fell, others said she was pushed. Her body wasn't found for 3 days. Her name was Rebecca, and she was 19 years old. She had long dark hair and was wearing a white nightgown when they found her. I moved out the next day. I didn't even take all my stuff. I just grabbed what I could carry and left. I stayed with my brother for 2 months until I found a new place. I've never been back to that building. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear footsteps in my dreams, back and forth. And sometimes, just before I wake up, I see a girl with dark hair standing in the corner of my room, her head turned at an impossible angle, watching me with those wide, unblinking eyes. I'm a long-haul trucker based out of Edmonton, Alberta. I've been driving across Canada and the northern United States for almost 15 years now. I've seen a lot of strange things on the road late at night, but nothing compares to what happened to me on Highway 6 Inches, Saskatchewan 2 winters ago. It was early December, around 2 a.m., and I was hauling a load from Winnipeg to Regina. The temperature had dropped to -30, and the highway was completely deserted. No other vehicles, no rest stops, just miles and miles of frozen prairie stretching out in every direction, the kind of isolation that makes you feel like you're the last person on Earth. I had my radio on, some late-night talk show buzzing in the background, when my headlights caught something on the side of the road, a figure. A man standing in the snow, waving his arms. Now, I've picked up hitchhikers before. It's not something I do often, but when it's -30 and you see someone stranded, you don't just drive by. That's a death sentence out here, so I pulled over. As I got closer, I could see the man more clearly. He was wearing a heavy winter coat and a fur hat, but something about him looked off. His clothes seemed old, outdated, like something from the 1970s or 82nds, and his face was pale, almost gray, even in the glow of my headlights. I rolled down my window and asked if he needed help. He walked toward my truck slowly, his breath visible in the frozen air. When he reached my window, he looked up at me and smiled. But it wasn't a normal smile. It was too wide, stretching across his face in a way that made my stomach turn. My car broke down about 10 miles back, he said. His voice was strange, flat, like he was reading from a script. Could you give me a ride to the next town? Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to drive away. But I thought about that cold. Nobody survives a night like that without shelter, so I told him to get in. He climbed into the passenger seat, and immediately I noticed the smell. It was faint at first, but it grew stronger. A sour, rotting smell, like meat that had gone bad. I tried to ignore it, Told myself it was probably just his wet clothes or something. We drove in silence for a few minutes. I tried making small talk, asking where he was headed, what happened to his car. He gave short, vague answers. Said he was going to visit family. Said his car just stopped working. Never gave any details. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. You know, I used to drive this road all the time, back in the old days, before the accident. I asked him what accident he was talking about. He turned to look at me, and his eyes were different now. They were darker, deeper, like looking into two empty holes. The accident that killed me, he said. I nearly drove off the road. I gripped the steering wheel and tried to stay calm, telling myself he was just messing with me, some crazy hitchhiker trying to scare me for kicks. That's not funny, man, I said. What are you talking about? He didn't answer. He just kept staring at me with those empty eyes, that too wide smile still frozen on his face. I looked back at the road, my heart pounding. When I glanced over again a few seconds later, he was gone. The passenger seat was empty, but I hadn't stopped. I hadn't even slowed down. There was no way he could have gotten out. I pulled over immediately and searched the entire cab. Nothing. No sign that anyone had ever been in that seat. But the smell lingered. That awful, rotting smell. I didn't sleep that night. I drove straight to Regina and parked at a truck stop with all my lights on, sitting in my cab until the sun came up. The next day, I did some research. I called a friend who lived in that area and asked if there had ever been any accidents on Highway 6. He told me about one. Back in 1983, a man named Gerald Fitch had been driving home from work when his car hit a patch of ice and flipped. He was thrown from the vehicle and died on the side of the road. His body wasn't found until the next morning. My friend said locals had reported seeing a man standing on that stretch of highway for years, always in winter, always late at night, always asking for a ride. Some people picked him up. He would talk to them for a few minutes, and then he would simply vanish from their vehicles. They called him the Phantom of Highway 6. I've driven that route maybe 100 times since then. I always drive a little faster through that stretch. I never stop, no matter what I see on the side of the road. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm alone on the highway and the wind is howling outside, I catch a glimpse of something in my side mirror. A figure standing in the snow, waving its arms. I never look back.